Thanks for joining me with the basket quilt along. So today's video is all about assembling the quilt top. So we'll just review the different blocks that we've made. You can go back and watch those videos on how to make those. We have 5 different styles of basket blocks, and we need a total of 18 blocks for our quilt. So some of the blocks you'll make 3, some of them you'll make 4, just so you have a total of 18 blocks total. So we have this one. This is just named the basket quilt. Then we have, this one is called the basket of chips. Then we have the May basket, the flower basket, and the fruit basket. Okay, let's just take a look at our mock-up of our pattern here. We're going to be needing a few pieces to assemble it. So these strips here, these blue strips that surround each of the blocks, they're called sashing strips. We're going to need those. We're also going to need these little cornerstone squares here, these pink ones. We'll need those, and then we're going to need some different triangles to go on the sides and in the corners. All right, so I've already cut 48 of these sashing strips. So these need to be 1.5 by 10.5. So 48 of those. For our cornerstones, these are 1.5 inches square. We're going to need 31 of those. And then for our triangle pieces, we're going to be doing these a couple different methods. So the reason is we want to make sure that the bias edge is on the inside of the quilt and not the edge, because we don't want the edge and the quilt to be distorted. So if we place them on the inside and sew them in, it will lessen that distortion effect. Okay, let's just get started with our corner triangle pieces. So we'll have 2 squares of fabric. These are each going to be cut in half on the diagonal to make 4 triangles. So these 2 squares are 8.5 inches, and I'm just going to line them up so they're just exactly on top of each other. And then I will just take my ruler from corner to corner, line it up, and just slice it right in half. Okay, so these are going to be our end triangles. For the side triangles, we're going to start with 3 large squares. These are 16 inches. Now we're going to make sure that they're all lined up, stacked nicely together. All the corners line up so that they're cut accurately. And then we're going to just take a ruler, and this is just barely going to be long enough, and we're going to slice this in half on the diagonal in both directions. And try not to let your ruler move as you go. And then I'm going to turn it, and I will cut the other way. I feel like it didn't go through all the way right here. Okay, so then we will have our triangle pieces for the side. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We need 10 of these, and we've just cut so that we have 12. So 2 of these are extras. Let me just show you what I mean by the distortion that can happen. So if you have a square of fabric, if you pull one direction, there'll be some give. If you pull the other direction, there's probably a little less give. If you pull from corner to corner, you have a lot of give. And that is because this is considered the bias, the diagonal of the fabric. So the way that we cut this block, there were 4 of these, right? But there's 2 more right here. But the way that we cut it, we cut on the bias. So these edges on the side are going to have a lot of give. This edge on the end does not have as much give. So we want to make sure that those side pieces that have the bias are sewn into the block, and it's not on the edge to get pulled and distorted. And so that is why we cut these blocks for the side from a square 4 by 4, because those 2 bias edges will be on the inside of the square. And then these ones on the end, since we just had the squares like this, we cut on the bias, but that long edge is going to go on the edge and will be sewn into the block. So the two edges are not going to have as much give as this edge right here. I'm not going to pull it because I'm going to use that one. But so that's kind of a little lesson on the bias edge and why we cut them the way that we do. We have everything now that we need to start assembling our block. We have our end triangles and side triangles, we have our sashing and cornerstones, and we have all of our blocks made. So I'm just going to take this over to the floor of my living room and just lay it all out. I want you to take note of how we're going to kind of do this. So we have our blocks and they're kind of in rows like this, but I want you to think about it on the diagonal like this. So we're going to be sewing them in rows. So this right here is going to be a row, and then this is going to be a row, and so on. So I want you to think about it like this in rows instead of like the rows across like this, because that's the way that we're going to sew it. Now I'm laying out all of the sashing pieces with the quilt, and I'm just putting one around each square. Okay, we're going to take our side triangles and we'll just place them along the sides and the top and bottom. Okay, so we have the quilt all laid out how we want it. So I'm going to start up here on this top left corner. I'm not doing any triangles yet, so we'll just leave those sitting there. But I'm going to start here with the sashing row. So I'm going to take the cornerstone, the sashing, the cornerstone. That's going to be my first row there. Then I'm going to go down here. Remember, I'm not doing the triangles yet, but I'll do a sashing, a block, a sashing. Then I'll move down and I will sew the cornerstone, sashing, and make that sashing row. And then I will move down here. I'm messing it up as I'm going here, but we'll have the 3 blocks with the sashing in the middle that we'll do. And I'll just continue on until I have all of the rows. Now we're going to be going this way, and I've just messed it all up sitting on it, but we're going to be going that way. So each row we're going to sew together a block row and then a sashing row. And I'm going to press towards the sashing. And I have a little helper today. This is Rex. So say hi. Okay, so I have the rows all sewn together, our block rows, our sashing rows, but I don't yet have this triangle sewed on. So I'm going to take each row So I'll take the block row that I've done and then the 2 triangle pieces to the sides of it, and we'll sew those together. Okay, so I brought this first row over here to the table just so that I can show you a little more easily how to assemble these. So you'll have your triangles on the sides. You'll notice that the triangle side is longer than the block side. So what you're going to do is you're going to line up the bottom edge of the triangle with the bottom of the square. And then you'll have a little bit of a dog ear up here on the top that will overlap. So you'll just place it right sides together and you'll just stitch along the side 1/4 of an inch. And you will have a little bit left on the top, which is fine. We'll trim it up at the end. And you'll just take your other side, you'll do the same thing, line it up on the bottom side, and you'll have that little bit of a flap at the top that's extra. Okay, we have our first row sewn together, and I'm just going to take my pressing mat here, and we will press towards the triangle. So I'll just take my iron, I'll lift the triangle and press that way. Okay, so we will just go do this with all of the rows. Of course, the center blocks will have a lot more as we go through the rows, but it's the same process of taking the triangles and adding them to the sides of the row. Okay, something to note is we are not adding our smaller triangles at all at this point. So for this row and the next, we will only do the one side. We're going to save those sides for once we've assembled the rows and the sashing rows together. Okay, so we have got all of the rows sewn together with the triangles except for our 4 corners. So those are not sewn on yet. Once again, we will start in the top left corner of our quilt, and we're going to be sewing together our rows. So we'll take our sashing row here at the top, we will add it to this block row. Then we will continue on down, adding the sashing and the block rows all the way down. Keep in mind that we're not doing these corner triangle pieces yet. We're not going to worry about those until the very end. So let's just start sewing the rows together. I've got our top sashing strip sewn to the block. So when I did this, I just lined up the seams and sewed it on. But as you get farther and farther along in the quilt, it becomes a little bit trickier to just do it without pinning. So I generally don't love to pin, but for putting together rows, I always do because it helps me keep things lined up. So you'll want to make sure these cornerstone blocks are going to be lining up with the sashing blocks of the previous row. So we're going to flip it right sides together, and we're going to nest the seams. Now another thing is these triangles on the end don't really have anything to match up. So we're going to work with the first sashing strip and work outward, and then we'll pin these outer pieces. But we want to make sure that these seams line up. I just realized when I pressed all of the seams towards the triangles that it is messing with my seams nesting. So what I'm going to do, what I recommend you doing, is pressing towards the sashing for everything. I had kind of forgot that, doing this over a couple days time period. But I'm just going to flip this back side so that I can nest this seam. So I'm going to take a little pin, and I'm just going to pin where the seams need to nest. Right here. And then I'll just work my way over here. I'm just going to go to these seams over here and nest them. And then once again, I'll flip this back one back because I made that mistake of pressing to the wrong way on that. And then if you'd like, you can pin another pin here in the middle, but I like to get those seams lined up before I do that. And then you can also add a little pin in here if you'd like, just to keep things lined up on both sides where there's not any more seams, but you still just want to make sure that it lays nice and flat. So we'll just pin it like that, and then we'll just do a 1/4 inch seam. Okay, so we've got our sashing sewn, and we'll just press this. I'm gonna flip it this way so it's easier. And we'll just press towards the sashing. Okay, so there we have this first sashing row, block row, and sashing strip. We'll just grab our next row. We'll just lay it out here, and I'm going to grab this and I'll flip it right sides together, and I'll just start in these middle sections here, and we will press or nest the seams and pin them just like we did on the other one. When you assemble a quilt, I used to think, oh, I'll just line them up, but it's just so long. Like, I can eyeball quilt blocks and get things to work, but when you have these big long strips, especially after that first row or two on this diagonal type, it's just better to pin, because then you make sure that things stay where they're supposed to stay. So I start kind of in the middle, and then I work my way outward. And then if you'd like to pin in between, you can. I think it's okay. I'm okay with not doing that, but if you want to, you can. Okay, so we've got that next row, and we will just continue on. I'm going to press each time, and then I'll add the next row, alternating between the sashing rows and the block rows until we get all the quilt sewn together. Now it's time to add our corner blocks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this block, I'm going to fold it in half and find the center point, and I'm just going to finger press a little crease right there so that I know where the center point is. Then I'm going to do the same thing with the triangle. I'll just line it up and finger press a little indentation there so that I know where the center is. Then I'll place the triangle right sides together like this, and I will line up those creases and then pin. So that is the center, and then I'll just make another pin here on the outer edges. Then we'll just take this over to the sewing machine and sew a 1/4 inch. Now we have the corner triangle sewn on. We'll just take our pressing mat here, and I'm just going to press this flat. Now you'll notice that the corner or the cornerstone pieces here poke out a little bit. That's okay, don't worry about that. They do it down here as well. We're going to be trimming up the quilt, but for now, just add all 4 corners to your quilt. Now it's time to trim up the outside of our quilt. So I just want you to take a look here on this cornerstone here. I want you to pay attention to this corner right here where the cornerstone meets the sashing, and then again here on this side. Those are the 2 points that we're going to line up our ruler with. Now we're not lining the edge of the ruler up with it. We are lining up the 1/4 inch marking. So on your quilting ruler, there should be a marking that's 1/4 inch away from the edge. So you want to line up that marking with those 2 points. Okay, so let me zoom out here a little bit. Since I'm going to start on the corner here, and we want to make sure that this side is also 1/4 inch away. So I'm just going to take my ruler and I'm just going to move it around until the points on this side are lined up with the 1/4 inch marking, and the points on this side are. And then we'll take our rotary cutter and we will just trim. Now this corner doesn't look like it's quite square, but I think it'll be okay. An error on my part in the sewing or something. It's just slightly off. But that is how you trim up the side. Now, as you work your way down the quilt, you're going to need a longer ruler here. So let me, oops, zoom out even farther here. We want to make sure that we can see this top one, because we're using these as our guideposts. So we want to make sure that we can see that one, or use that one and the cornerstone down here at the same time. So we're going to line up both of those, and then we'll trim. Then we'll slide our quilt up. And we'll do that to this next cornerstone as well. So we'll just line up this one. Remember, the points go with the 1/4 of an inch marking. Okay, and I'm just going to trim 2 here. Then we'll turn our quilt, and then we'll use our other ruler again so that we can do both sides. This one's not quite long enough to do that one. So I'll take this one again. This top line is cut partly, so we'll just make sure that that one's lined up, and then this one on the side is lined up. And then we'll just trim the side and the top, and then we'll just continue all the way around the quilt doing that. So we want to make sure that the 1/4 of an inch marking on the ruler is on the points of the cornerstone. Okay, so when we add our border, we will have a 1/4 of an inch seam, and so then these points should just be lined up so that we have exactly half of that triangle showing on the quilt top.